Hello again, everyone. Welcome to episode 17 of Can You Hear Me? I'm Rob Johnson, president of Rob Johnson Communications.
And I'm Eileen Rochford, CEO of the marketing strategy firm, the Harbinger Group. Analyzing the yearly Edelman Trust Barometer is fascinating to me, and it's a real insight into what Americans are thinking about those who influence all of us. The title of this edition of Edelman's yearly survey, which was released in January, is called The Cycle of Distrust.
Now, we're going to do this a little differently today. Instead of one guest, we have two. We're very fortunate to have two experts in the field of communication. The first is Lissa Druss, who, like me, started her career in journalism, but then transitioned to the strategy world by first working at Seraphin and Associates for 8 years. Then 3 years ago, starting her own firm, Strategia Consulting. Lissa, welcome.
Thank you very much, Rob and Eileen.
Great to have you. Thanks for being with us. And our other expert today is Anne-Marie Mitchell. Anne-Marie has spent many years in the agency world, having worked at Golan and Ketchum, and she served in leadership roles at major corporations. She still does agency work on a contract basis and is, for the past 14 years, she's also been an associate professor at Columbia College here in Chicago, teaching PR studies courses and developing a new curriculum. Anne-Marie, I'm so delighted to have you here. It's great for you to be with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
So let's start this conversation with the cycle of distrust, because that's where the focus is. Because as this report illustrates, distrust is now society's default emotion. We're witnessing an unprecedented volume of disinformation and societal division, which many feel is fueled by government and media institutions battling for political and commercial gain. So leading the list, or should I say at the bottom of the list, depending on how you look at it, nearly 1 in 2 respondents view government and media as divisive forces in society. 48% view government and 46% view the media in this light. Equally concerning is the finding that journalists were seen as trustworthy by just 46% of respondents, and government leaders even less, just 42%. So I know we're throwing a lot of numbers at everybody, but we're just trying to give it context before we get into our discussion. So Lissa, let's start with you. As someone who spent years working in the media, and now who runs her own firm with government clients, why does this trust in the trust in these two institutions continue to erode? And it seems like every year they're kind of at the bottom of this. And so I think probably telling people, hey, government and media are at the bottom of the list, and people kind of shake their heads. But what's the long-term ramification of having these kinds of numbers year in and year out?
Well, one of the things that we are often consulted for is crisis communications. And if you look at the word trust, it is eerily similar to the word truth. Even has a U in there, a couple T's in there. Trust and truth are paramount. And when you are talking about media or government, you have to be trustful. That means you have to be speaking about the truth. Sometimes the truth is ugly. Sometimes people don't want to hear the truth. But when you're looking at government specifically, when there's something funky going wrong or something's not right, shining a spotlight and making truth stand out is 100% of the way to kill a conspiracy, kill something bad, kill whatever. When we're doing crisis communication, the one thing that we look for is truth, because truth is the best defense. Truth, 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 and truth leads to trust. Now, this day and age, it pains me to say this, as Rob, you know, as journalists, social media is more important than traditional media. The best thing about the internet is anyone can become an expert. The bad thing about the internet is anyone can become an expert. And if you are not truthful in that, then no one is going to trust you.
And what do we think is ahead for all of us if these numbers continue to dwindle, Lissa, particularly in government institutions?
Well, the numbers are going to continue to dwindle because there's going to be more and more and more and more and more media, social media. You have a podcast. Tom Seraphin and I have a podcast. 10 years ago, we didn't even know what a podcast was. So this is going to continue to amplify, and there's going to be more messengers and more messengers and more messengers. And really, it's a crisis because truth will bubble up. Truth will sustain, will be the end of all ends, will be the truth. And everything else is just going to get pushed down. And it's really about education and informing people. Information is knowledge. Knowledge is power. And if you give people the right information, got a fighting chance at winning this, especially with government. Our governments aren't going to go away. Our local municipal governments are some of the hardest things to work in. Unbelievably hard. And I work with a ton of them, and I don't envy them, but we need them because this is what our country is based on. It's government. Mm-hmm. Good government. Shine a spotlight on good government. And when you shine the spotlight, all the cockroaches go away.
Now, that's a really good point. I'm glad you mentioned local government. I was thinking to myself, that is one of the growing areas. One of the bright spots is I think people do trust local government and local news. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And I think a little bit, one thing we need to do is take a step back too. And this whole debate about the role of journalists and time in terms of shining a light. 100 years ago, Public Opinion was published by Walter Lippmann, who is really one of the first pundits, And so if we kind of take that long-term perspective, we know that punditry and this influence journalists have tried to exert over our government is, a part of the history of journalism, right? And, even Walter Lippmann was challenging this idea that journalists could be entirely neutral because they wanted, everybody sees the world through a certain lens, certain reality, and wants to shape it into the reality that they see. So this whole debate, about the true, ability for the journalist to be a non-bias is something, we've always been talking about. And, punditry is really, because of social media, tying to what you were saying, is just gone through the roof, right? So this ability of a journalist to, share their opinion, and then what is it, a journalist or is it an entertainer too, right? And we know that that's one of these issues that's really shaping and driving this mistrust, because we don't, necessarily even see the role of a journalist anymore as independent. Many journalists also have entertainment publicists, they're trying to grow their brand, their personal brand. And I think, tying exactly what you said, social media enables this, right? It enables this blurring of lines between a truth seeker and a promoter, right? And we also know, I read some articles, Columbia Journalism Review used to look at, Obama and what Obama was doing with Zacharias and some of the pundits, and trying to kind of, cully their favor so that maybe an opinion piece could be written in his favor in a time when he's trying to get, public opinion to stir his way. And we know Trump, and our former president took that to a new level in terms of the relationship and the blurring of lines between news and government. So, I think that's a really important issue too, is know this is part of the challenge.
That's a great point, Anne Marie. And Lissa, you said something earlier about the podcast, which is content creation, which is what we're doing today. And you talked about yours and Tom's. And I think it's really important. I know that our opinions about things that are based upon our backgrounds and based upon our years in the professional world creep in. I have no doubt about that. But what I'm suggesting is that what Eileen and I are doing here, what you and Tom are doing on your podcast, you are trying to give good information and trying to peddle, the truth. And a lot of people would do something like this so that they could spread misinformation. So I think that's one of the most dangerous points that we can make here is if you and your heart are trying to impart accurate, good, important information, that's one thing. And yes, opinion does creep in, no question. But if you're sitting there saying we're going to create a podcast or some other kind of content creation to mislead people, that's the road that we absolutely can't go down, that we appear to be going down. Any thoughts?
So, shameless plug, our podcast is called The Crisis Cast, appropriately named. And the opinion that we share is our experience and the opinions that we give our clients and how to have truth prevail, because every crisis client that Tom and I have, either that we share or we work on independently, and we are still together, even though I don't work with him anymore. We still share clients and we share resources, and his son works for me. But we ultimately ask for the truth so that our clients are trustworthy. And that's what we do, is we raise awareness and create third-party supporters so that we can help. I'm stumbling because it's so simple, but it's so complex. We help our clients understand that they're trustworthy. We wouldn't work. We wouldn't put Seraphin and Associates wouldn't put their name on a client if they didn't believe in it. Strategia Consulting would not put our name on a client if we didn't believe in them. And truth be told, we have a client right now that Lab Elite, I'll tell you because I've been quoted in the paper on them. They were investigated by the feds last week. They're a lab testing agent for COVID. They probably they got lumped in with every other lab that's being investigated. But one of the reporters, Eric Hong, I was talking to, and Christian Farr I was talking to about this. I said, guys, you know me. I wouldn't put my name with this company if they weren't trustworthy. And they're like, you're right, Liz. So I'm going to work with people that are trustworthy, and I'm going to help them become more trustworthy.
I love hearing that. Applause, applause, applause. Thank you. I mean, they're just the challenge that I think is there are people like you in this industry, and the rest of us on this podcast share that point of view. Absolutely. And so we live by that code, but there are so many who don't. So, when the volume of information that's being pushed out by untrustworthy as well as trustworthy folks, how are people to discern? That's largely where we sit, the challenge that we face.
Yeah, I love though that Lissa shared that. And I think it is a trend though, where we're seeing more agencies, even big agencies. And Edelman recently announced too, that they are going to do a review of clients and make sure that there's an alignment in terms of climate action that all of their clients are taking, and try to do the right thing. And I think that gets to another point of the Edelman survey. I mean, it's interesting. Edelman put out the Trust Barometer, and they are the agency that is doing this, that is taking this huge step and saying, we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and we're going to do a client review and make sure that our clients are doing the right thing, and employees are demanding it as well.
Highly admirable. I'm really grateful to see that, because, it wasn't long ago that our industry, particularly on the PR side, didn't exactly have, the greatest reputation. So we've all battled that in the time that we've been doing this as a career. I'm going to transition us into, or back to, I guess, looking at some more of the findings from the most recent Edelman Trust Barometer. So when it comes to our major sources of information, the public trusts, wait for it, search engines the most, with 59% viewing this source as trustworthy. Traditional news media slightly less at 57%, owned media at a much lower 43%, and a social media as the least trusted of all at 37%. I want to pause for just a second on that search engine as the most trusted with the highest number. Obviously a little concerning, because we all, I think, know full well search engines are, they mostly deliver information. They certainly don't originate information. And the way that they deliver that information is highly targeted. And they do so because they're looking to send information to people so that they'll click on it. Clearly, the point being, if the information aligns with their personal belief systems or their values or their own ideas, whatever, grounded or ungrounded, that's what they send them. So that alone, I just want us to kind of let that sink in for a second, because that number has continued to climb. And now it's at a point where I was personally a little terrified to see that. So just to pause on that. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in on that point in a sec when we kind of tee it up for
there's a hand again. There's a hand going up.
Awesome. Hey, let's do
lady
it.
has got a hand.
Lissa.
You know what the second largest search engine in the world is?
YouTube.
Why? Because it's visual. Nonverbal communication is 2/3 of how we communicate. Nonverbal communication is 2/3 of how we communicate. So that music, that video, that color, that saying, that's how we communicate. And that's why people gravitate to YouTube.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about how Pew, when Pew does all these, the annual survey, and now it's more regular than annual, but of media trends. And I remember 10 years ago when I would teach the students, I talk about media channels. Where do you get your news? And so many would say, I get it from Facebook. I get it. And I would say, that's not a news channel. That is a distributor of news content. And the students then I think they were maybe ahead of me on this. Actually, when you look at it, the kids are always ahead of the trends because look at where, it is today. They're, I'm sure, driving some of this understanding that, no, actually, I am getting my news from a search engine. And I told you that 10 years ago, and more and more are saying that. So whether, you like it or not, that is the reality. And I think if you take a global perspective and think about what's happening in Ukraine today, we know that search engines do serve a purpose, and in some countries, media is state-owned and can't be trusted. So, it's this intersection between, we're going to talk about corporations in a minute, but why are corporations trusted? And corporate, runs a lot of these social media channels, so corporate leaders, because they have such an oversized impact on world events, right. So I think the students were ahead when it came to knowing that social media or social media would be their news source.
So I want to introduce another component to this thread that we're unraveling. Concern over fake news is at an all-time high right now. Yet we know that so much of what's delivered through search engines, which are so highly trusted, isn't necessarily fact-based. In fact, often it's not fact-based. The crackdown on that has been too slow, and so much damage has been done. But is there pressure right now on the news media to provide fact-based reporting versus that amplification of propaganda and fake news? Does that pressure exist in our panelists' opinions?
Well, number one, let's go back to the days of Tom Brokaw, Peter Jennings, Dan Rather. Did we know what political affiliation they were?
Unlikely.
No, we didn't. Now you cannot turn on a network without knowing their political affiliation. And you literally, I tell my daughter and I tell other people, watch two networks. You watch CNN and watch Fox. And then you can watch the same exact story being reported with two different spins. That's what, unfortunately, a lot of our news has become today, is it gravitates to one audience or the other to draw in the audience that they want so that they can build on that audience, so they can charge more for a commercial, so that they can build on that audience. It's become so sectionized. It's disgusting. And I truly believe in my heart of hearts that there's going to be some kind of a correction. It's going to have to be an outlet that actually does not report the news with bias.
Yeah,
and that has to happen.
Yeah, and I think, Lissa, you're right. And the trend toward nonprofit, I know because at Columbia College Chicago, where I teach, and the journalism students, they want to be a part of these new media changes, right? They want to contribute in a positive way. And they challenge the profit motivation of many corporate media entities. And, we were just talking about how Chicago Public Media just purchased the Sun-Times. So we're going to see that's going to be huge. Block Club Chicago is so trusted by everyone I know in Chicago. Quite honestly, that's where the people will go for the news. They were the first to break the story. I had that horrible fire in the neighborhood the other day. We still don't know how it was caused. That brought down two business establishments and on the north side in Albany Park. And Block Club Chicago was the first one to break the story that they were looking into one of maybe the landlords and really investigating it and bringing that news out and people turn there. They're there first. So I think these experiments are growing, and I think it might be what Lissa was getting at in terms of what is going to have to change. And I think it's looking at the profit motive.
I think it's very reassuring what you just said, Anne-Marie, because there are entities out there that are doing what you're suggesting if you're going to restore that trust. And when 76% of the people are suggesting that they just want fact-based reporting, and yet, Lissa, what you said about CNN or Fox, so many people turn on the TV, who are still turning on the TV, by the way, and they're going right to where they want to hear what they want to hear. And that is a huge profit center. And now you're talking about having a not-for-profit model that's really starting to flourish. And I think that's good. If you just want the facts, that's probably going to be the best way, because still the power of a Fox or a CNN or an MSNBC who take sides before the story is even reported, that's been a horrendous trend in terms of building that trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know too, the Fox News relationship, a very highly profiled and publicized relationship between the White House, the past Trump, former President Trump and Fox News. It was very clear, like it wasn't even masked, that there was a revolving door between, folks, his counsels on the news network, his counselors, and then some of the, and that trend started with, Obama, Clinton. They all, were like we were talking about earlier. They have all gotten insight from pundits and journalists, and tried to establish that relationship with them so that they could have them, put that well-placed article or that well-placed commentary out in support of their policies.
Let's talk about Chris Cuomo and Governor Cuomo. Raise your hand if you were shocked that Chris Cuomo was talking to his brother when his brother was in trouble. Really?
I was not shocked.
No shock there. I was. That was
okay. I'm being facetious. The point is,
they can't see facetious
when we were
on
journalists. When Rob and I were journalists, we worked like the Dickens to cultivate sources. I mean, we were nothing without our sources. Anything. And how many times would we have elected officials or even their chiefs of staff contact us to try and spin us, to try and turn us one way? I mean, that's what Tom Seraphin did forever. That's how he met his wife, Ann Seraphin, is he tried, and I Cannon, he tried to spin her to get his candidate on the air more. And that's what they do. But people like Rob and I, which are dinosaurs in the unbiasedness, that we took it with the proverbial grain of salt. In this day and age, when I deal with elected officials, first of all, I don't work for them. I work with them. I don't work on a campaign. I don't represent one side or the other. Tom and I are probably the last two firms in the city, if not the country, that are non-political. We do not side. We are known as a Republican or a Democratic firm, both of our firms. We are apolitical. And that is what we pride ourselves on, so that we can help our clients to the best of our ability on both sides of the aisle.
That's a really important point that you're making there, in terms of, still having that guiding light that you're following, even though you've left that business and I've left that business. I still am, having spent 25 plus years in it, it's hard to say, oh, I'm taking a side, because I spent years not taking a side. And so people say, what industries are your best industries? I'm like, whoever has trouble communicating. And somebody will say, I've got this person or that person. And if I think that they're doing, as you're talking about the trust factor earlier, Lissa, if I feel like that's something that's important to them, then those are the people that you want to work with. This is a really interesting part of the conversation, but I want to change gears a little bit now and talk a little bit about business, the expectations for where people work. Business, specifically, quote, my employer, leads in the most trusted category with 77%. Overall, business leads the way at 61%. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, at 59%. Governments at 52%, and the media at 50%. This wasn't always the case, as historically, I feel like there was always been a palpable skepticism about, is what my boss telling me true? So Anne Marie, is this trust in your business, the fact that people are working remotely, the fact that there is a disconnect now in the business world a little bit, even though we have great ways to communicate, the fact that you can't communicate in person, is this a product of the pandemic disconnect where workers are craving more information, any information, or do you think it's something else?
A great question. I spent a few decades in employee communications, and I still consult in this area. And I think the work going on in organizations today, the CEOs, senior executives, to forge these bonds and connections internally is really off the charts. I think that this, retention, like you're saying now, so difficult with the remote workplace, but yet technology has enabled people to see each other face to face. I mean, missing that in-person connection, but being able to connect regularly through technology. It's a fact. Retention is important now. We know the Great Resignation is a huge trend, and we know that when employers can retain their workers, they're going to see tremendous cost savings, because onboarding is so, as as business owners, right? As small business owners, once you get that employee on board and they've been trained and they know your routines. You don't want to lose those people. You want to do everything you can to keep the people. It's the same no matter what organization you have, small or large, right? So cost savings, but then happy employees are productive employees, right? So there's that bottom line benefit. And the great thing living in this data-driven society that we're in now is the data's in. I mean, it is known. I mean, you keep employees, you retain your good employees, you keep them happy, they're going to be more productive. You are going to see the bottom line savings. And, smart companies are acting on this data. And I can tell you, this wasn't always the case. Like you were saying, Rob, you didn't always trust the boss. You always looked at the boss with skepticism. And I can tell you, when I started in this business, I worked for, I will not name, a very large utility company in Chicagoland. And the CEO at the time, I remember when I was doing employee communications work, the trust survey came in. We had done a survey to find out, did employees trust leadership? The numbers weren't good. So basically the CEO said, well, we're just going to put that away and not do anything with it. And, that was very common, back then, right? You didn't like the numbers, you just didn't share them. And there was a CEO transition and there was a change in the culture. And, now every employer wants to be on that best employees list. That CEO, they want to be the most trusted CEO. So they are working really hard with that data and trying to establish that reputation. So I think it's no accident, that you're seeing employers and my CEO is trusted. CEOs generally are not trusted, but my CEO is trusted and my colleagues and my coworkers are trusted. So I think that's what the data is showing. And I think it's largely because that's the real work that organizations, industry is doing now. They want to fill that void, in our society.
That I just want to jump in on the point that you made about my CEO, my coworkers. That's interesting because that also kind of aligns with another aspect of the findings of the Trust Barometer about trusting people kind of in your tribe, right? Mm-hmm. People from your city more than you do fellow Americans or people from other countries, et cetera, right? That's very clear from this data and has continued to climb. Another very disturbing piece of it. But one that I don't think we're going to delve too deeply in today, but it's interesting how that aligns. So let's move into another area here. We got a couple more big bites of this data that we wanted to be sure we cover. So while business outscores government by 53 points on competency and 26 points on ethics, respondents believe business is not doing enough to address societal problems, including climate change at 52%, economic inequality, 49%, workforce reskilling, 46%, and providing trustworthy information, 42%. And further, CEOs are expected to shape conversation on policy on issues like jobs for the economy, that's a whopping 76%, wage inequity, 73%, technology and automation, that's at 74%, and global warming and climate change at 68%. So my question to our panelists is, what can leaders do to better understand what is expected of them from all of these key constituencies? I'm not just talking about the people who work there, but all of the constituencies, people who buy their products, partners, influencers, et cetera. What can they do to better understand what is expected of them from these folks? And do they have an obligation to communicate their own and their company's position on major societal issues?
First of all, they need to wake up and smell the coffee, and this is evolution, okay? This is not the old boys network anymore. My company is a certified women business enterprise. I am proud of that. I work with many companies where diversity and inclusion is a key factor. I have my clients claim me as a diverse spend because I have a WBE certification. This has to change. This is no longer business as usual. Evolution. Everything evolves. Again, we didn't have podcasts 10 years ago. Now we do. We didn't have diversity and inclusion mandates before. Now we do. And I don't want to say mandate. Mandate's a wrong word. It should be included in every corporate structure. It's a hard thing to do. Not everyone is good at it. But you have to look at what you have at your makeup and make sure everyone is treated equally. And it's disgusting that it's still happening today, and it's not. It's disgusting.
Yeah, Lissa hits on a great point. The past year, the amount of conferences and discussions and truly impactful work that organizations are doing around DEI is it's impressive. But I mean, it's only the beginning, and some of it is too much conversation, not enough action. But some of it is action, and some organizations really are saying, how do we lift the voices of those who've never been represented before? How do we literally change our organizational structure to make more room? And I think it's the tipping point. Hopefully we're going to be seeing a lot more, because I think that is key, is just bringing diverse voices in, and leading with empathy. I think that's another thing that I think is we're starting to see more of from leaders, is, just trying to be more there we're meeting people where they're at, hearing what they're saying, hearing what their issues are, and responding. So I think it's continuing to lead with empathy, decrease that inequality gap. I mean, I'll tell you, I think we all remember a time when we started working and the CEO made 40 times the lowest paid employee salary. And now it's, it can be hundreds of times the lowest paid employee. So I think looking at inequality wherever it is, and thinking more about that as well.
I think you made a great point, because I think it's a start. Lissa, you said that it's a start, and sometimes some places it's lip service, but I think they've realized if we don't do something meaningful and actionable, we're going to get left behind. Not only is it going to hurt our profit margin, but more importantly, it's the right thing to do. This is the way the world is going now. And I've seen clients that are like, how do we do this? And I'm kind of committed to it. And I've seen other clients that are truly in on this, and they have committees and they're doing work on a daily basis to further the cause of equality in all forms and fashions in their businesses. And those are the ones that are going to get ahead. Yes, it will impact your profit margin, because people won't work with you if you don't have a good DEI plan, if you're not making sure that you're adhering to principles of equality. But also, it's a better place to work. And we get back, let's circle way back to like retention and recruitment. You're not going to get the best people anymore to work at your company if you're not really doing the work that is sincere and that's real.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Rob. I just want to jump in too, because if you look at the Edelman survey, it talks about the real mistrust. People who lack trust are the low income. They did a study. If you're higher income, lower income, folks at the lower end are feeling such a lack of trust. And so how are we going to build trust? If that's the question at the bottom, how are we going to bring more trust? It's going to be by also addressing the inequality issues. It's connected.
Absolutely. I agree with you on that, Anne-Marie, no doubt about it. I also kind of want to dig a little into our panelists' expertise and recommendations on what are the best ways that you have seen or would recommend that leaders, particularly these business leaders, can gain that understanding of what their specific constituents really care about and want them to do. What do you think are the best mechanisms to get that information?
Well, human relations.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, I was just going to say the same thing. I wish I could say it's some sort of mind-blowing, like new thing. I think some of it is like the basics are still the things that work. And now that there are more, different types of, data collection, I think they should be collecting more data on a regular basis and acting on it. So, I mean, it's really, how are you, when you reach out, when you have that town hall, when you have, when you're starting to work on DEI and put your DEI plans together and you're starting to execute them internally, getting that feedback. Are we doing it? Are we meeting your needs? And just building in that continuous feedback loop. I mean, I think it's really, and that ties to empathy too, because truly, if you're willing to listen to the hard stuff as well as the good stuff, too many people just want to hear the good stuff. Oh, just blow smoke my way and tell me how great I am and how wonderful. You saw that great DEI statement I made in that terrific presentation. Are you not dazzled? Well, here, listen to the hard stuff too. Listen to the, maybe you didn't go further enough. Maybe we're not really seeing enough action quickly. Maybe you need to change some things about whatever policies are in place to really impact me at the every level of the organization. So I think it's just honesty and empathy and a willingness to hear good and bad. And I don't think all leaders are willing to do that. You look at the different technology. I mean, I think the tech industry is doing a pretty phenomenal job. They're at the high end in terms of building trust. If you look at the Edelman survey, sort of financial services is at the low end. So, I mean, maybe it's a matter of looking at the different industries that are doing a great job and seeing what they're doing as well. I mean, best practices are still also helpful.
Lissa, I have an interesting thought. Lissa had a thought.
I would go back to old-fashioned human relations and get out of your C-suite and talk to people at large. Pick, 10 people in different departments in your company, 10 people that you normally don't talk to, and take them out for coffee and explain to them that this is not a job review. This is a review, a help me help you learning experience. Get to hear people that they normally don't talk to and find out what makes them tick. What are the strengths, the weaknesses, the threats, and the opportunities that an employee sees in a company? And if you don't listen, you're never going to hear.
That's such a great point. Active listening, real listening, not just like, oh, I checked that box off. I had that coffee with that employee team. Like you said, it's the active listening. Absolutely.
Something that we do often is we conduct assessments for companies. Sure, we're a communication strategy firm, but under that strategy, communication is part of how you operate, is the whole internally and externally. So we do assessments for companies, nonprofits. I'm part of a DOJ assessment for a police department where we go and interview people in a company, 19, 20 people at our clients' directions. And we ask them these questions and we tell them these interviews are completely anonymous. So just have at it. They're like a couch in a shrink's office, and tell us everything, good, bad, and different, because no one's going to know who said it. And I wrote an assessment for a company once, and when we finally went through the assessment, 2 of the top people were like, "Oh, I know I said that line. I know that came from me." And the reality was, 4 people said that same line. But the point is, we did an assessment and helped them understand their strengths, their weaknesses, their threats, and their opportunities on how to run a company and what the employees thought, felt, and wanted to see happen. And that was a way of opening up your ears and understand. And just for the fact that the CEO wanted this assessment done, maybe he couldn't sit down with 20 people, but we could, and we meant the world to those people that we were interviewing, that the CEO knew that we told them, number one, the CEO wants this. So pretend you're talking to the CEO because you're talking to us for him.
Oh, that's great. Great advice from both of you. Thank you. I really like the combination of direct feedback, human relations, as you put it, Lissa, and also, the gathering of data. All that's super important. It was struck by a thought as you both were speaking that people are probably very uncomfortable having conversations like that directly with their leadership teams, and they're not going to be as forthright with what they have to say. But when you put someone like you, Lissa, in that seat, gathering the information, that's a whole other kind of layer of comfort, I'm sure, that's brought, to the collection of information. So that's great advice from both of you. Thank you. I had a short anecdote to share. I have one client. They are definitely a model of gathering of input from their employees, particularly in the last 5 years. And they also were recently named to a very prestigious best of list, national kind of award, in the top 20. And when they were asked to participate once more in next year's collection of information, they declined because it would involve a very lengthy employee survey. And they're already gathering so much information from their employees that they don't want to jeopardize, that they're not willing to go for that award because they want to be able to get the information that they need to be able to do and continue the work that they have underway, which I thought was pretty great. So I just thought I'd mention that. Interesting how now companies are going to have to grapple with that too. The over-surveying of their employees, which will become a big problem, right?
Oh, yeah.
They didn't do it enough, and now they don't want to do it too much.
Now
That's right.
everybody can do it too with polling on Zoom. Like I could do, everybody can do surveys.
Totally.
Well,
But you do it in the classroom.
Yeah, right.
I think this is a perfect segue into talking about CEOs, more specifically leadership. When considering a job, 60% of employees want their CEO to speak out on controversial issues that they care about, and 80% of the general population want CEOs to be personally visible when discussing public policy with external stakeholders or work their company's done to benefit society. What goes into responding appropriate to this dramatic change in expectations from the recruitment perspective? Anybody can jump in here. I think it's very interesting. Eileen and I talk about it a lot, and it's not only building a CEO brand or a leadership brand, but it's also having something to say about important issues, because so many people now don't just want to go work for a place and make a good living and do that sort of thing. They want to be invested with people who they have similarities with, and people that care about the environment, or they care about equity, things of that nature.
Absolutely. I mean, did you want to jump in, Lissa?
Yep.
No, you go first on this.
Oh, okay. Well, I just because this is so near and dear to my heart, this topic, as a professor who's working with young people trying to transition into communication careers, advertising, PR, social media, all these growing industries, hearing them speak about how important it is to them. I mean, I know students who'll go in, get these great jobs with a lot of big, high starting salary and just say, I'm probably going to be moving on because I just don't believe in this mission or this cause, that is always the top question of discussion whenever you're talking to students in career counseling. It's like, it's not just going to be about a paycheck to me. It's going to be about, I have to feel really good about where I'm going every day to work. And I mean, I see them putting their feet where their mouth is, like they will move on if they don't feel that important connection. And so I know companies know this, but the other thing is our world is so complicated now. And I just feel like we can't, not talk about what's happening in Ukraine today, and looking at the corporate impact, looking at what BP did when they withdrew their investment from Rosneft, the Russian oil company. I mean, that was huge, and they're going to take a huge profit loss on that with that decision. And, I don't think you could have expected a corporation to do something like this decades ago. I mean, but today, and then looking, Apple and all of the different, corporations that operate in Russia are really, they're being called to account. Well, what are we going to do about this? And they're hearing it from all sides. So I think we live in a world today where major corporations have such a major geopolitical impact on so many different aspects of our society that they really cannot not engage on societal issues. And I mean, and even in this country, if you look at the issue, after the brutal killing of George Floyd and so many protesters across the country, again, that was another conversation and I think that's why we got to where we are today with DEI in a lot of respects, because the conversations were happening locally and people were really wanting to hold their employers accountable to do something. So I don't see these trends going away at all. I see them growing more so, especially with the up and coming Gen Z.
The thing that gives me pause, and I don't disagree with you, but the thing that gives me pause are the political discussions. And that's where I would absolutely, unless your company is built based on one political platform or another, you don't know who works for you. And to stay quiet in a political discussion sometimes is the best thing to do, because you don't want to offend some of your employees. People don't like to be told what to think. They like to make their own decisions. And when you shove something down someone's throat, and this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it, that's going to affect morale in one way, shape, or form, because not everyone, unless a company or an organization has a political slant, absolutely. But if you're, let's say, General Motors, if you're Motorola, if you're the CEO of a huge Northwestern hospital, you better be careful on what you decide to talk about and where, because it has gotten people into trouble, especially when they say the wrong thing. How many CEOs have we seen lose their jobs because they've stepped out and said the wrong thing and have offended someone?
That's a very good point. No, I was actually just really processing, and because I was thinking about Anne Marie's the examples, a couple examples that Anne Marie gave, even BP, the example of BP withdrawing their investment, and that's an obvious show of support for Ukraine. Would you consider that political, Lissa? I'm just curious.
No.
Okay.
Because that's just wrong.
Yeah, exactly. That's how
I'm talking Republican, Democratic, Socialist, Independent. I'm talking the root of our economy, the root of our country.
And I think
because look at our state in Illinois alone. South of I-80 is a different state than north of I-80, period, full stop.
And you think about
anyone
how
who owns
political,
a company in Illinois, that's not easy.
That's true. You think about politics being so divisive. It always has been. It's only getting more so. But the whole Ukraine thing is a really great point. And I'm glad you made that delineation, Lissa, because it feels like most people are unified in what they're seeing and saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is going on. And they're seeing what the leadership in Ukraine is doing, which I think is very impressive. You know, do you need a ride out of town? And the president's like, nope, I need ammunition. I mean, that's very impressive. And so I'm glad that you made that distinction, because I think it's important when we're talking about politics in our country and sort of the geopolitical issues going on right now, which are hard to ignore.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of companies taking a stand on the abortion law in Texas, for example. That's a perfect example of a political stance that it sounds like, Lissa, you would always advise not to take. Yeah. Unless
you are built on that issue.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's because most of the time it appears to be far afield of not only your values, but just, is that the playground that you typically play in?
Well, and I think
my rule of thumb is politics and religion, stay out of it.
Right. Part of it too is, if you have, for example, maybe you're operating in Texas. I mean, I think it gets more complicated. And that's why I don't feel like there's no one size fits all, because you have to listen to your stakeholder groups. And I think what we're seeing is the rise of the employee voice as an even more impactful stakeholder group than it's ever been before. So I think it's going to be never a one size fits all. You have, depending on the leader, depending on the management team and the type of organization you're leading, and how much do you, again, have that two-way communication with the employees? How much of a voice does the employee have in sort of your operating principles, for example? And let's get back to values. One of the things we didn't talk about earlier when we were talking about the survey is, what are your values as a company? And values are so unique to every company. So if a company has put something related to women's rights, okay, you can't be a company that says, hey, we are going to put equality for women and gender at the top of our values list. That's our value. But yet we're going to keep quiet on maybe an issue that is affecting our employees and our stakeholder groups. That would be a huge mistake, because you're not living up to your values. So I think it's like, it gets a little bit more complicated when you think of it that way, or maybe it gets more simple. Maybe that's actually a way to simplify it, is to say, what are your values as an organization? And put it through that litmus test, instead of like a stake in the ground. We're, not going to ever do this. Well, does it align with our values or not? I mean, that's the litmus test, I believe, for most organizations.
Yep. We concur 100%. I'll add to that mission. So bundle those two together, your values and your mission. That's where you start. Everything pretty much passes through there. Right. And it's going to be increasingly more complex, I think, as we move along. And I loved the point that you made, Henry, about the rise of the voice of the employee. I don't think it's going away either. And it's something that leaders are really going to have to pay so much more attention to.
Especially with the Great Resignation. You want that great talent. You want that, new talent. Yeah. You better, it's different. We're different generations here, Yeah.
No doubt.
Mm-hmm. I mean, our
values piece, the more that you as an organization live those values, clearly identify them, clearly define them in terms of what they mean to you as an organization. The litmus test of the employees that you attract starts there, right? If you have that so clearly established, then the folks who align with your mission and your values are the most likely to want to come and work for you and stay. So you'll be able to represent, what matters to them much more easily because they're kind of in your camp to begin with. That's another, school of thought for sure. I think it's a pretty important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah. And if an organization hasn't gone through that exercise of going through their values and maybe even reevaluating their values, that was actually one of the most rewarding things I ever did at Sara Lee Corporation. Was we were under Brenda Barnes' leadership, who is really one of the most impactful female CEOs, I think, ever. And she's so missed today. She inspired me. She was that CEO that left PepsiCo after she had children so that she could raise her children. She had the highest position at PepsiCo North America in the 90s. And for me, that was hugely impactful. I mean, I don't know if you all remember this, but it made such big national news in the 90s. That a CEO woman who had attained this, top position left her job, and people said, "Oh, that's the kiss of death. She'll never get back into corporate America." And then she ended up being CEO of Sara Lee Corporation. And so she was like my role model. But anyway, she led the transformation and the effort to create values. And I, as employee global comms lead, we went through this amazingly inspirational process of the leaders kind of came up with some of their thoughts, and we went back and forth with employees all around the globe and ended up a year-long process using very funky, whatever the technology available at the time was, which wasn't very savvy like today, but we were able to have these chats and, and get input on the values and then unveil them. But it was a truly collective process that was immersive, and it brought the whole organization together. So it wasn't like, we're going to bestow these values upon you employees. It was like everybody had the input and the buy-in, to the values. So that is such a super rewarding process. And I don't know if organizations, do that work enough, or frequently enough to say, are our values still aligned with where we want to be, where we want, where we're heading?
And particularly right now, that's very sage advice, honestly. Mm-hmm. There's just the tumult, just even of the last 2 years. But there was a lot that preceded that as well, in the last 2 decades. If folks haven't done that kind of reevaluation exercise, it does feel like now would be a very important time to put that at the top of your list, or at least plan for it in 2023. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This has been an unbelievable conversation. I want to thank Lissa Druss of Strategia Consulting and Anne-Marie Mitchell of Columbia College for your amazing insight. Thanks for being with us today. What a great discussion. Eileen and I are so grateful you're here.
Thank you. Thank you to both
of you. Thank you for the topic.
It was a lot of fun.
Very important stuff, no doubt. And that is going to do it for another edition of Can You Hear Me? I'm Rob Johnson, president of Rob Johnson Communications.
And I'm Eileen Rochford, CEO of the Harbinger Group. We thank you for listening. Remember, you can listen to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Apple, Google, Spotify, all of them. Thanks so much, everybody. Until next time.